I've interviewed thousands of consultants that have made the switch from top tier firms like McKinsey, Bain, or BCG into a private equity portfolio company. Some have had incredible success, while others have failed really badly. The reason for this is not what you'd think. It's not because they didn't work hard enough or they weren't smart enough. Rather, it's something else entirely different. They didn't understand or appreciate how the two different systems operate. I'm Ken Canera. I'm the CEO of ECA Partners. We are a specialized project staffing and executive search firm serving private equity as well as private equity portfolio companies. In this video, I'm going to break down how consulting is very different than private equity portfolio companies and why some of the skills that you think would translate very directly don't. And then I'm going to wrap up with helping you make the transition or prepare yourself to succeed in a private equity portfolio company. So let's start with the first thing, which is what the two systems reward or value. Well, let's start with consulting first. At a consulting firm, the thing that matters most is revenues, just like any other company. Well, in order to generate revenues, what do you do at a consulting firm? You bill the client for hours that you spent working on their particular engagement. And the way you do this successfully is you spend a lot of hours in very deep analysis. And if you think about what's valued internally at a consulting firm, it's the skills that allow you to bill a client more, right? That makes sense. This is so true that they literally have terms like don't boil the ocean or the 80-20 rule to prevent people from actually doing too much of the thing that they actually get paid for, right? Because if they do too much of that, the client will wise up and potentially cut them off. Okay, so this is what's valued at a consulting firm, right? Well, that's very different than what's valued at a private equity portfolio company. What's valued at a private equity portfolio company requires us to first think about what's valued at a private equity firm, and that is returns to a fund for their investors. That includes LPs and GPs, right? If it's all about returns, well, then at a portfolio company level, that means basically two things: growing EBITDA and expanding multiples, essentially the price you can sell a company for, right? So just like if you were to do a real estate transaction as a real estate flipper, you would buy a property, you would do a bunch of upgrades to it and potentially sell it at a higher price. Same exact concept is true in private equity, just at a much, much bigger scale, and it's for businesses, not homes. And so if you think about it, what investors really value then is anything that's going to lead to that successful outcome for the investors. It's not necessarily more analysis. Where I see a lot of former consultants stumble in a private equity context is they are going to continue to do the thing that made them very successful in a consulting firm, which was really tight, consistent, very pretty analysis. Well, no one actually cares about that in a private equity portfolio company. They do care about getting to the right answer and then actually going forward with the execution of whatever it is you're figuring out. So that's the first thing. You have to understand how these two different systems work and what is actually rewarded and valued. The next thing to think about is going to be decision making. Okay, so in a consulting firm, let's be honest, you do not have to live with the decisions you make. You don't. You do work for a client, you hand them over some analysis. Ideally, it's really good and it's gonna empower them to do something valuable with it. But at the end of the day, you get to walk away and whatever it is that you've told them to do really has no impact on your career, on your life, whatever. In fact, some could argue that giving them the answer and them not being able to actually execute it allows you to bring in your implementation team to actually do the work. In consulting, you do not have to live with the decisions that are made. It is very, very different in a private equity portfolio context. You absolutely are expected to make decisions first and foremost, and then live with them. Now, for some people, this can be really empowering and fulfilling. It makes things a lot more interesting and fun for operators, right? Essentially, you're running the business and you're gonna live with the consequences of your decisions. And for some people, that's really empowering and exciting. For some people, it's really terrifying because consultants are known for being insecure overachievers, right? And they're often very terrified of really doing anything or living with the consequences because that's not how how they've had success. So that's the second thing you need to think about. That is really even a gating factor altogether. If you're not interested in making decisions and living with the consequences, both good and bad, you should probably not consider making a switch to a private equity portfolio company. You're not going to enjoy it. It's way too stressful for some people. The last thing, and this one's surprising to most people, but I would just say is resource constraints. So in a private equity portfolio company, especially low mid-market versus mid-market, you do not have the same resources available to you that you did in a consulting firm. In a consulting firm, you're working for large, usually Fortune 500 clients, sometimes Fortune 50 clients, and it's all about, again, like I said earlier, tight, consistent, pretty analysis and billing a lot of those hours. And in order to do that, you usually have a research department, usually have a slide creation department, it's usually often offshore. You have access to expert interviews at the click of a button. You are part of a very big machine and you are serving very big machines. And that means you have basically unlimited resources. Conversely, if you are at a low mid-market or even a mid-market portfolio company, I mean, we're talking about, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in top line revenue. That means you do not have often budgets to just, for example, hire consulting firms at a whim. Hiring decisions are very thought out and strategic. Conversely, at a private equity portfolio company, it's a very different situation. You have very serious budgets that you need to adhere to. You do not have an infinite supply of resources the way you would at a big consulting firm. And oftentimes you're having to roll up your sleeves and really do the work yourself. So again, just like with decision making, some people are going to see this as a positive. They are excited about owning a result and rolling up their sleeves and doing the work themselves. That's exciting for some people. For some people, that's not what they want. They would be much better suited to take a corporate strategy role in a large Fortune 50 company, build a big team, not necessarily have to worry about doing the work themselves. They get more out of directing versus doing. So let's just take these three things, right? Resource constraints, we have decision making, we have the reward system in terms of what's valued, right? And now let's use this to our advantage, right? So if you're looking for a role at a private equity portfolio company, then you ought to think about positioning yourself such that you are looked at as an attractive potential hire for these portfolio companies. And so you need to be playing up elements of this in your LinkedIn profile or resume, that sort of thing, as well as in the interview process. Know that a lot of these investors and operators have had bad experiences with folks that haven't made decisions, that don't want to do the work themselves, spend too much time doing the analysis. So realize that they've burnt their hand with folks like this before in the past. So you should do everything you can to alleviate their concern. And then if you happen to have recently gotten a job at a private equity portfolio company, by knowing these things, you now are much better equipped to work with investors or portfolio operations team to ensure that you're going to be successful. You know what they're worried about. If this has been helpful, make sure to give us a like or subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.